Welcome to Lunch with the Lord. I'm Pastor Mark. We're in 1 Peter chapter 2, starting at verse 22 this lesson. But before we begin, Jeremiah 15:16. Thy words were found, and I did eat them. And thy word was unto me the joy and the rejoicing of my heart. Now, in verse 22, Peter here goes on and he writes and he says, who did no sin, neither was guile found in his mouth. All right. So he says here, who did no sin, obviously talking about Jesus. And you know, earlier in this lesson, Peter wrote about the sinless life of Christ in chapter 1 and in verse 19. Peter writes and he says, but with the precious blood of Christ, as of a lamb, what? Without blemish and without spot. Jesus Christ was our lamb that was without blemish and without spot. He knew no sin. He committed no sin whatsoever. And, you know, verse 22 of 1 Peter chapter 2 seems to be a quotation from Isaiah chapter 53 and verse 9. And it says here in Isaiah, it says, and he made his grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, because he had done no violence, neither was any deceit in his mouth. Now, when Peter makes this statement, who did no sin, he's reinforcing the idea that Jesus suffered, again, unjustly, which is the theme of which Peter has been emphasizing from verses 18 through 21. This is the emphasis of what Peter is saying, that Jesus Christ suffered unjustly. And he's writing here this letter to Jewish believers here in Asia Minor, but now he's dealing with servants. Those Jewish believers who maybe they got a job in Asia Minor as a servant in someone's house. And maybe they're suffering bad treatment by their masters. All right? And he's trying to encourage them that as Jesus Christ suffered unjustly, so also we do. And we arm our minds with that same mentality, that we follow the example of Jesus. We follow his steps, that as he suffered unjustly, we walk in his steps and we see how he reacted. We understand what he said and what he did. And we learn from his example, and we live our lives like that, because we will endure unjust suffering at times because we're Christians, all right? So, this is what he's saying here in verse 22. Who did no sin. Jesus Christ never did sin. So whatever he suffered here on earth, the mocking, the ridicule, the beatings, the scourging, the persecution, whatever he experienced, it was unjustly, and because he did no sin. But you know, ever since Satan deceived Eve, this has been one of Satan's main weapons against all of humanity, saved or unsaved. This is one of Satan's biggest weapons that he uses against humanity. And what is that weapon? It's the weapon of to accuse God of sin, to attribute sin to God. You know, Eve could say, God, you're unfair and you're keeping things from me. Eve could accuse God of that. The children of Israel in the wilderness could say, God, you're a hard taskmaster. We can't keep your laws, and we're tired of eating the same old food for the past 40 years. You know, people today could say, if God truly is a God of love, how many times have you heard that? I've heard that a few times, right? If God really was a God of love. Oh, and then you here it comes, right? If God were truly a God of love, then why are there so many wars, right? Why is there so much sickness, unnecessary deaths, right? And unnatural disasters like earthquakes, famines, volcanoes, and tornadoes. What are they implying? They're implying this. Well, if I were God, oh, nobody would suffer unjustly. Nobody would suffer famines. Oh, there'd be no famine ever. If I were God, oh, everybody would have porterhouse steaks, vegetables, ice cream, right? Ice cream sundaes. Everybody would have their bellies full. Their feet would be up watching TV. Oh, yes, life would be so wonderful if I was God. I know, come on. We've all thought of that before. What life would be, what the world would be like if we were God, right? There'd be no suffering, no deaths, no heartaches. Oh, no. People wouldn't be hungry. No more tornadoes, no volcanoes. Oh, no. We would make life beautiful for people, right? You know, all of these questions and accusations have their basis, they have their root in the very nature of Satan himself, of which we also are a partaker of. The sinful nature that Satan has and which we also have is 100% focused on accusing God of being a sinner, of sinning. When Adam and Eve sinned, when Lucifer rebelled against God, and he had sin in his heart, and sin took over, and he had the nature of sin within him. When Adam and Eve sinned and listened to Satan's lies, his half-truths, and they sinned also when Adam and Eve sinned against God and rebelled against God and his word. They took upon themselves the nature of Satan himself, which is a sinful nature. And that sinful nature was passed down to all of us, all of their children. Every single one of us has that sinful nature residing within them. Okay? So there is always the tendency for mankind, whether saved or not, doesn't matter. There is that tendency within mankind to want to accuse God of being unjust, of being unrighteous, of not being fair, of being a sinner, not making good decisions. Okay? There is that nature within all of us that wants to accuse God of being a sinner. Have you ever noticed that people who are adamantly against Christianity and the Bible, in one way or another, accuse God of sin? Or they accuse God of not caring, not loving, of making bad decisions, right? If God truly were a God of love, why do we have so much hatred and so much war and death, right? If I were God and Adam and Eve sinned, I would have just wiped them all out and not had humanity go through all of this, right? If I were God, I would do this, right? Everybody has their own opinion of what life would be like if they were God, right? And we've all thought of that. I know. Come on. You know, the reason why humans have a hard time understanding God as being holy and how God relates to the things that take place on earth is because the sinful nature that we have within us can act as a veil between us and God. We have a hard time understanding how can God truly be holy and just and righteous and yet allow all of this stuff go on in the world. And sinful people, sinful mankind, humanity looks at God from this position. They look up at heaven and they say, how can you allow all of this? There must be some kind of sin involved in your life. And they can't understand how a holy and righteous and pure God can allow all of this to happen and still be pure and still be holy and still be sinless. Because the reason why is because sin infects all of our thinking and it fogs our minds. All that we on earth have ever known is the effects of sin, which is death, hatred, anger, growing old, wars. Humanity has never ever experienced an existence outside of sin and its effects. We've never known what it's like to live outside of sin. I've said this before in earlier messages on other subjects in my lessons here, but I've said it before, I'll say it again. All we've ever known is sin and the effects of sin. When you wake up in the morning, you're tired. That's an effects of sin. When you walk outside, you're seeing plants growing. That's life. You're seeing plants dying. That's the effects of sin. It's all around us. You see life and death. You see love and hatred. Everywhere we go, we see God's kingdom and Satan's kingdom at war. We see death all around us. The effects of sin are all around us in this world, and this is all we've ever known. And therefore, it's very, very difficult for a human being. In fact, it's probably almost impossible to conceive of heaven and of God as not having at least a little bit of sin in it. A little bit of rebellion. Is it really possible that in heaven there's no sin? That nobody disagrees with God or with anybody else? That people can do things in heaven and there's no jealousy? Really? Come on. That can't be true. You know, there's no hatred. There's not a little bit of suspicion in heaven. Come on. And the reason why we think that way is because this world is filled with it, and it's all we've ever known. This is the only existence we've ever had. And we can't imagine, I shouldn't say we can't, it's very difficult for us to imagine an existence where there is none of that. All right? So it's hard for us to think of God and to not attribute some kind of wrongdoing to him. There is always this temptation within us to want to accuse God, to want to attribute some kind of wrong decision, some kind of sinful decision, sinful act to God. But to see God as holy in all of his decisions and in all of his workings among people has to come from one thing, and it's from faith. That's it. By faith, I believe that God is holy. By faith, you and I believe that God is righteous. He has never sinned. He has never made a decision from a position of sin or under the influence of sin. And I believe that. How? Because I've seen it? No. Because I've done it? No. No. I believe it because by faith. I believe God is holy and just and righteous by faith. That's it. That's it. When we lose faith in God and faith in his word, we begin to entertain thoughts that maybe, just maybe, God has made some mistakes. Maybe he isn't really who he seems to be. It is faith in God's word that keeps God holy and righteous and sinless in my heart. I believe through faith in the word of God that God is holy. He's just. He's righteous. Every decision he makes is absolutely pure, absolutely holy and righteous. That God in himself is not in any way tainted by sin. I am tainted with sin. I've got a bunch of sin in me just like everybody else. And I understand it is very difficult for a human being, again, whether you're saved or especially for the unsaved, to view God as being a holy and righteous God and pure God in all of his ways. Because we look around us and we see all the wars and the disease and the sickness and the crime and the fightings and the arguings and the hatred, and we see it all. And we say, how can God allow this? And there is an answer to that. There is an answer to that. But anyways, and we say, how is it that God can allow this to happen? Allow to see all of this going on, and yet seemingly, he does nothing. But that's the faithless view. The faithless view is that God sees it, but he does nothing, or he does very little, or he doesn't care. But the faith view says, my God is absolutely, intimately in control. He is absolutely, intimately involved in everything going on in this world. He knows exactly, and he is very much knowledgeable about what is going on in this world. And he knows the end from the beginning. He's already got the end planned out. All right? And how we will be delivered from all of this. Okay? All right? Until next lesson. Walk with the Lord. I know he walks with you.